A peaceful coastal town shadows lurking beneath the surface, a battle-hardened veteran searching for redemption, an innocent woman trapped in a web of deceit, race against betrayal where money breeds treachery and one man's instincts become her only. Hope the deadliest threats where familiar faces Marcus Chen, 38, carried the weight of 3 combat tours in his tired eyes. The memories of firefights and fallen comrades had left invisible scars deeper than the jagged mark running down his left forearm. After 15 years of service, the nightmares and constant hypervigilance had taken their toll. His hands, once steady enough to disarm explosives under enemy fire, now sometimes trembled when memories surfaced unexpectedly. Seeking solace from his turbulent past, Marcus found himself drawn to the quiet shores of Silver Bay, a picturesque coastal town where fishing boats dotted the horizon and salt-laden breezes carried the promise of peace. The small community, nestled between rolling hills and the vast Pacific, seemed worlds away from the desert battlefields that still haunted his dreams. Marcus took a job as head of security at the prestigious Ocean Crest Resort, a sprawling 5-star destination that catered to the wealthy elite seeking escape from their high-pressure lives. The position was a far cry from his military expertise, but the routine of patrol routes and security protocols offered a familiar structure that helped quiet his racing thoughts. The resort's general manager, Victoria Hayes, had hired Marcus, despite his obvious reluctance to discuss his military background. Something in his demeanor, the way he carried himself perhaps, or the careful way he assessed every room he entered, told her he was exactly what the resort needed. "Your experience speaks for itself," she had said during the interview, noting how his eyes constantly scanned the exits. "Sometimes the best security is invisible, and you understand that instinctively." In his first month, Marcus established new protocols and trained his small team with precision, though he kept his interactions professional and distant. The other guards respected his expertise, but found him hard to read, a man who preferred the solitude of night patrols to the camaraderie of shift changes. During quiet moments, he would stand on the resort's cliff-top observation deck, watching the waves crash against the rocks below, finding strange comfort in nature's constant rhythm. His only real connection in town was with Dr. James Foster, a retired Navy corpsman who now ran a small medical practice near the marina. They had met by chance when Marcus needed stitches after a minor accident during resort renovations. Something in the doctor's steady hands and understanding silence sparked a tentative friendship. Like Marcus, James carried his own burdens from service, and their shared experiences created an unspoken bond. Late one evening, as Marcus completed his final rounds, he noticed unusual activity in the resort's exclusive north wing. 3 men, in expensive suits, were escorting a young woman through the dimly lit corridor. Something about their formation struck his trained eye. They weren't protecting her. They were containing her. The woman, petite with dark hair, moved with the rigid posture of someone under duress. Marcus lingered in the shadows, his instincts from years of combat surveillance taking over. The group stopped near the elevator, and he caught fragments of their conversation. "The arrangements are final," one man said, his voice carrying an edge of threat. "You'll sign tomorrow, or things will become very uncomfortable." The woman's response was too quiet to hear, but her body language spoke volumes, shoulders tense, hands clenched, the subtle shift of weight that suggested she was evaluating escape routes. As they disappeared into the elevator, Marcus memorized their faces, particularly noting the cold efficiency in their movements. These weren't ordinary businessmen. They carried themselves like operators, people trained in control and coercion. The woman's face had stayed with him. Beneath her composed expression, he had recognized the same look he'd seen in civilians caught in combat zones. Controlled fear, masking desperate calculation. Later that night, in his small apartment above, the resort's detached garage, Marcus sat at his desk, unable to shake the scene from his mind. The security cameras would have captured the interaction, but accessing those feeds without cause would violate resort policy. Still, years of military intelligence work had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was telling him something was very wrong. Dr. Foster's words from their last conversation echoed in his thoughts. The hardest part of leaving service isn't the action you miss. It's learning when to stand down, when to let civilian life take its course. But as Marcus watched the ocean winds bend the cypress trees outside his window, he knew this wasn't about missing action. This was about recognizing a threat that others might not see, about preventing whatever violence lay beneath the surface of wealth and propriety. The next morning, as fog rolled in from the Pacific and the resort's early risers began stirring, Marcus made his decision. He would watch, gather intelligence, and prepare for whatever might come. His military training had taught him that the deadliest threats often hide in plain sight, and he had learned that lesson at too high a cost to ignore it now. Something dangerous was unfolding within the polished walls of Ocean Crest Resort, and he might be the only one who could see it coming. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ocean Crest Resort's marble floors as Marcus began his shift. He deliberately positioned himself near the North Wing's entrance, blending into the background as affluent guests streamed past. His attention remained fixed on any sign of the woman or her escorts from the previous night, all while maintaining the professional invisibility expected of resort security. The luxury property buzzed with its usual morning activities: staff preparing the oceanfront restaurant for breakfast service, valets parking expensive vehicles, and well-heeled guests discussing their plans for spa treatments and golf outings. Marcus observed it all with practiced detachment, noting how wealth seemed to create its own atmosphere, one where reality felt somehow suspended above the concerns of ordinary life. Victoria Hayes approached him mid-morning, tablet in hand. "Marcus, we have several high-profile guests arriving for the corporate retreat. I'll need you to personally oversee their security arrangements." She handed him a list of names and requirements, but his focus caught on one detail: the Hamilton group was occupying the entire North Wing for their executive board meeting. "Any special protocols I should be aware of?" he asked, maintaining a neutral expression while his mind raced. This could be his opportunity to gather more information about last night's events. Victoria hesitated before responding. "The Hamilton Group values their privacy above all else. Their head of security will coordinate with you directly, but they handle their own internal matters." Something in her tone suggested she was choosing her words carefully. "Just ensure no unauthorized personnel enter their designated areas." As Victoria walked away, Marcus pulled out his phone and began researching the Hamilton Group. The global investment firm had recently been in the news for a controversial merger, but what caught his attention was a smaller article about succession plans within the company. The aging CEO, Robert Hamilton, was reportedly stepping down, with speculation about who would take control of the multi-billion-dollar empire. During his lunch break, Marcus drove to Dr. Foster's clinic, finding the old medic tending to his small garden of medicinal herbs. James looked up from his plants, noting Marcus's troubled expression. "You've got that look," he said, wiping soil from his hands. "The same one I used to see before missions went sideways." Inside the clinic's back office, over cups of strong coffee, Marcus shared his observations about the previous night, careful to exclude specific details that might compromise the resort's privacy policies. James listened intently, his weathered face growing serious. "Sometimes the worst threats aren't the ones carrying weapons," he said finally. They're the ones carrying briefcases and legal documents. I need to know more about what's happening in that wing, Marcus admitted. But I can't risk losing this job. It's the first time since leaving service that I've felt... He trailed off, unable to find the right words. James nodded, understanding. Purposeful. Listen, son, I've treated enough wealthy patients to know their world operates by different rules. If your instincts are telling you something's wrong, there's probably a reason. Just remember, you're not in a combat zone anymore. The enemy isn't always as clear as it used to be. Returning to the resort, Marcus noticed increased activity around the north wing. Men in expensive suits moved with purpose through the corridors, their security personnel watching everything with professional scrutiny. He recognized 2 of them from the previous night, noting how they positioned themselves at strategic points, controlling access to the wing's main conference room. As he patrolled the perimeter, Marcus caught glimpses of heated discussions through the conference room's windows. The young woman was there, seated at the massive oak table, surrounded by men in suits. Her posture remained rigid, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as others gestured animatedly around her. Even from a distance, the power dynamics were clear. This wasn't a meeting, it was an ambush. During his evening rounds, Marcus overheard fragments of conversation from the resort's bar. 2 junior executives, loosened by expensive whiskey, were discussing the Hamilton Group's internal politics. "Old man Hamilton's lost his mind," one said. "Leaving everything to her, the board won't stand for it. That's why they brought in Klein's team," the other replied, lowering his voice. "They'll make sure she sees reason, one way or another." The pieces began falling into place in Marcus's mind. The woman wasn't just another corporate player. She was Hamilton's heir, and someone wanted her out of the way. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. But this time, the battlefield was carpeted hallways and boardrooms instead of desert sand and mountain passes. In his apartment that night, Marcus meticulously reviewed everything he'd learned. His military training had taught him to analyze threats methodically, to look for patterns and vulnerabilities. The Hamilton Group's security team was professional, but they had blind spots. Their focus was on keeping others out, not on what was happening inside their perimeter. As he stood at his window, watching the fog roll in from the ocean, Marcus realized he was being pulled back into the kind of situation he'd tried to leave behind. But some instincts couldn't be ignored, and the need to protect those in danger was embedded too deeply in his nature. The question wasn't whether to act, but how to do so without making the situation worse. The next morning brought an unusual surge of activity to Ocean Crest Resort. Black SUVs with tinted windows lined the circular driveway, their drivers standing at attention while additional private security personnel positioned themselves throughout the lobby. Marcus recognized the choreographed movements of a protection detail preparing for a principal's arrival. Robert Hamilton's entrance created a ripple of tension through the resort. The elderly CEO moved slowly but deliberately, supported by a carbon fiber cane, his presence commanding immediate attention. Despite his apparent frailty, his eyes remained sharp, taking in every detail of his surroundings. 2 personal security officers flanked him, their earpieces and subtle bulges under their jackets, marking them as former federal agents. Marcus watched from his post as Hamilton was escorted to the north wing. The woman he'd seen earlier, now clearly Hamilton's daughter, met him at the entrance. Their brief interaction spoke volumes. Her relief at seeing him, his protective stance, the way both security teams subtly adjusted their positions to maintain separation between them and the other Hamilton Group executives. During his midday patrol, Marcus overheard Hamilton's daughter speaking with someone on her phone in a secluded corner of the resort's garden. "Dad, they're trying to force my hand," she said, her voice tight with stress. "Klein's team has been persistent. I don't know how much longer I can hold them off." She paused, listening. "The documents they want me to sign, something isn't right, but they won't let me consult outside counsel." Marcus continued his patrol, his mind racing. The mention of documents aligned with conversations he'd overheard in the bar. Whatever was happening went beyond normal corporate maneuvering. He'd seen similar tactics in his military days. Isolate the target, apply pressure, control their access to support and information. Later that afternoon, Dr. Foster made an unexpected appearance at the resort, carrying his medical bag. "Scheduled. House call," he explained when Marcus approached him. "One of the Hamilton Group executives requested a private consultation." The doctor's expression suggested there was more to discuss, but the lobby wasn't the place. Marcus escorted James to the North Wing, using the opportunity to observe the security arrangements more closely. Klein's team had established an effective containment perimeter, monitoring all access points and communications. It was professional work, but their focus seemed more oriented toward control than protection. As they walked, James spoke quietly. "I've been treating Robert Hamilton for the past month. He's been staying at a private residence nearby, managing his condition. The man's stubborn as hell, but he's not as frail as he lets on." The doctor's words carried a subtle warning. "His daughter Emma has been overseeing his care. She's the only one he trusts completely." The name connection clicked in Marcus's mind. Emma Hamilton. He'd seen her name in articles about innovation in sustainable energy investment. She'd built a reputation for steering corporate funds toward environmental and social causes, often against the board's preferences. Now her father was handing her control of one of the world's largest investment firms. During his evening rounds, Marcus noticed increased agitation among Klein's security team. They spoke in hurried whispers, frequently checking their phones. Something had changed in their plans. He positioned himself near the service elevator, pretending to check the emergency protocols while listening to their conversations. "Tomorrow morning," one of them said, "before the old man can interfere, make sure she's isolated." Another responded, "Klein wants clean hands. Make it look like her choice." The coded language sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He'd heard similar euphemisms in mission briefings, language designed to maintain deniability while conveying lethal intent. Whatever they were planning would happen soon, and Emma Hamilton was running out of time. In his apartment, Marcus struggled with his next move. Direct intervention would likely backfire. Klein's team had too much control over the situation, and any overt action would be quickly contained. He needed more information and a way to communicate with Emma without alerting her watchers. Knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Foster entered, his expression grave. "Just finished with Hamilton," he said, settling heavily into a chair. "He knows they're moving against Emma. The board meeting tomorrow is a trap. They're planning to use some kind of leverage to force her to sign away her inheritance rights." Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of leverage?" "The kind that doesn't leave marks, but breaks people," James replied. "I've seen that Klein character before, back when I worked at the VA. He handles problems for powerful people, specializes in making things look legitimate. Whatever they're planning, it won't be simple threats." The weight of the situation settled over the room. Marcus recognized the familiar tension before a critical mission. The calm before engagement, when plans crystallized into action. "I need a way to warn her," he said finally. "Something they won't expect or intercept." Dr. Foster nodded slowly, understanding the risks. "I have another appointment with Robert Hamilton in the morning. Medical personnel still have some freedom of movement, even in their controlled environment." He paused, considering. "Whatever you're planning, remember, these people destroy lives with paperwork and accidents. They're more dangerous than any enemy you faced overseas because they make their own rules." As James left, Marcus began formulating a plan. He'd need to move carefully, using the resort's layout and his security access to create opportunities. The skills that had kept him alive in combat zones would serve a different purpose now, protecting someone from enemies who wore suits instead of combat gear, but were no less deadly in their intentions. Dawn crept over Ocean Crest Resort, painting the horizon in shades of amber and grey. Marcus had spent most of the night studying the security footage from the previous days, looking for patterns in Klein's team movements and identifying potential vulnerabilities in their operation. Years of military surveillance had taught him to spot the subtle signs others might miss. Victoria Hayes arrived earlier than usual, her face tight with concern. She called Marcus into her office, closing the door carefully behind them. "The Hamilton Group has requested full privacy protocols for today's board meeting," she said, handing him a revised security schedule. "All regular resort staff are to be cleared from the North Wing by 9 a.m. Their team will handle everything internally." Marcus scanned the document, noting how it effectively isolated the entire wing. "Seems unusual even for high-level corporate meetings," he commented, keeping his tone neutral. Victoria hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Something feels off about this whole situation. Klein's people, they're not like our usual security teams. Just..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Keep your eyes open, but don't interfere. Unless absolutely necessary. The resort can't afford any incidents with clients of this caliber." As Marcus left the office, he spotted Dr. Foster arriving for his morning appointment with Robert Hamilton. The doctor carried his usual medical bag, but something about his measured pace suggested purpose beyond routine care. They exchanged a brief glance, a silent acknowledgement of the tension building within the resort's elegant walls. Marcus used his morning rounds to establish a clear picture of Klein's security arrangements. They had positioned guards at every access point, with additional teams patrolling the outer perimeter. Communication was being handled through encrypted channels, and all resort security cameras in the wing had been mysteriously disabled, a detail that raised immediate red flags. Through the conference room's windows, Marcus observed a steady stream of executives arriving for the board meeting. Emma Hamilton sat alone at one end of the massive table, reviewing documents with intense focus. Her father had not yet appeared, and Klein's people were carefully controlling who could approach her. Around mid-morning, Marcus intercepted a series of rapid communications among Klein's team. Something had disrupted their timeline. Robert Hamilton was unexpectedly delayed, reportedly due to medical complications. The news seemed to agitate Klein, who Marcus observed speaking forcefully into his phone while pacing the private balcony. Taking advantage of the distraction, Marcus made his way to the service corridor behind the conference room. Years of combat operations had taught him that chaos often created opportunities. He noticed one of the maintenance panels was slightly ajar, likely from recent work on the wing's climate control system. Behind it, he found access to the room's ventilation system. Dr. Foster's voice carried clearly through the vent, speaking to someone in the adjacent room. "Mr. Hamilton, your blood pressure is concerning. I strongly advise against attending the meeting in this state." There was a pause. Then, "At least let me give you something to help you rest. The meeting can wait an hour." Marcus recognized the doctor's intent. He was buying time, creating a window of opportunity. But for what? The answer came moments later when he heard Emma's voice, sharp with concern, asking about her father's condition. She had apparently slipped away from the conference room during the commotion. "Ms. Hamilton," James said, his voice carrying a deliberate weight. "Your father needs absolute quiet for the next hour. No disturbances, no exceptions. I suggest you take this time to get some fresh air, perhaps by the old lighthouse. The sea air might help clear your mind before making any significant decisions." Marcus understood immediately. The lighthouse, standing sentinel at the edge of the resort's property, offered both privacy and multiple escape routes. It was also outside Klein's established security perimeter, and its stone walls would make electronic surveillance difficult. Moving quickly, but cautiously, Marcus made his way out of the service corridor. He needed to reach the lighthouse first to secure the area and ensure Klein's team hadn't anticipated this possibility. As he crossed the resort's grounds, he noticed increased activity around the north wing. Klein's people were realizing Emma had slipped their net. The lighthouse stood stark against the morning sky, its white paint weathered by years of salt spray and coastal storms. Marcus approached carefully, using the surrounding rocks and vegetation for cover as he checked for any sign of surveillance or security presence. The area was clear, but he knew that wouldn't last long. Inside, the lighthouse was cool and dark, its circular staircase spiraling up toward the observation deck. Marcus climbed quickly, positioning himself where he could observe both the approaching path and the service road that wound along the cliff's edge. The elevation offered a clear view of Klein's teams, now spreading out across the resort grounds, their controlled urgency betraying their growing concern. Minutes later, Emma Hamilton appeared on the path, moving quickly but trying to maintain an appearance of casual purpose. Marcus watched as she approached, noting how she checked her surroundings. She had clearly recognized the danger of her situation. Now he had to find a way to warn her about the full scope of the threat without triggering the very scenario he was trying to prevent. The sound of vehicles on the service road confirmed his suspicions. Klein's people were already moving to contain the situation. Time was running out, and Marcus had to make a decision. The skills that had kept him alive in combat were telling him to act now, but the complexities of civilian life demanded a more nuanced approach. Emma Hamilton was about to walk into another trap, and he had moments to decide how to protect her without making her situation worse. As Emma Hamilton reached the lighthouse entrance, Marcus descended the spiral staircase silently, positioning himself near the doorway. He could hear Klein's vehicles approaching on the service road. They would reach the lighthouse within minutes. He had to act fast, but carefully, to avoid startling her. "Miss Hamilton," he called softly as she entered, keeping his hands visible, and his stance non-threatening. "I'm Marcus Chen, Ocean Crest Security. You're in danger, and we don't have much time." Emma spun toward his voice, her body tensing for flight. Recognition flickered across her face. She'd noticed him watching. "The north wing." "You're not with Klein's team," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "No, I'm not. And I know they're trying to force you to sign something today. They're coming now. We have maybe 2 minutes before they surround this building." Marcus moved toward the back of the lighthouse, where a maintenance door led to a narrow trail down the cliffs. "Dr. Foster sent you here for a reason." Emma's gaze darted between Marcus and the main entrance, weighing her options. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," Marcus replied honestly. "But I heard them last night. Whatever they're planning for the board meeting, it's not just about signatures. They talked about clean hands and making it look like your choice." He met her eyes directly. "I've heard that kind of talk before, in places where people disappear." The sound of car doors slamming outside made the decision for her. Emma nodded sharply and followed Marcus to the maintenance door. "Azaze," he eased it open, checking the path below. She spoke quickly. "They found something, or claim they did. Vials that would destroy my father's reputation, evidence of corruption that would ruin everything he built. They're using it to force me to sign over my inheritance rights." Marcus led her onto the narrow trail, keeping himself between her and the steep drop to the rocks below. Blackmail files that conveniently appeared just when they needed leverage? Classic playbook. Your father's reputation is probably clean, but by the time that's proven, the damage would be done. They moved carefully along the cliff face, the sound of waves crashing below, covering their movement. Marcus could hear Klein's men entering the lighthouse above, their professional efficiency evident in their coordinated search patterns. The trail wound down toward a small cove, where local fishermen sometimes moored their boats during storms. "My father," Emma started, her voice catching. "He's not really sick, is he? Dr. Foster was helping him." "Creating a diversion," Marcus confirmed, helping her navigate a particularly treacherous section of the path. "But we need somewhere safe to take you. Klein's team will have the main roads covered, and they'll check all the obvious places." Emma grabbed his arm suddenly, her grip tight. "The marina. My father keeps a private boat there, Slip 23. The captain is former Coast Guard, someone he trusts completely. If we can reach it—" A shout from above cut her off. One of Klein's men had spotted them from the lighthouse observation deck. Within seconds, the cliff path would be swarming with security personnel. Marcus assessed their options with combat-honed speed. They were too far from both the marina and the lighthouse to outrun professional pursuers. "Do you trust me?" he asked Emma quickly. When she nodded, he pointed to a narrow fissure in the cliff face, partially hidden by overgrown coastal vegetation. "That leads to a sea cave. Local kids used to use it for parties until the resort blocked the upper access. We can wait them out there." They squeezed into the fissure just as the first of Klein's men reached their section of the trail. The cave opening was tight, but it widened into a larger chamber, the sound of water echoing off mineral-stained walls. Marcus guided them deeper inside, where the cave curved away from the entrance, hiding them from view. Emma pressed herself against the damp cave wall, trying to control her breathing. They were never going to let me leave that meeting, were they, even if I signed everything over? Marcus shook his head grimly. "People like Klein don't leave loose ends. They'd have made sure you couldn't challenge anything later." He pulled out his phone, checking the signal. "No reception here, which means they can't track us electronically either. We need to contact your father. Let him know you're safe." "He'll be worried sick," Emma whispered. "He knew something was wrong. That's why he brought in Dr. Foster. He tried to warn me, but I thought I could handle it myself. I didn't want to believe they'd go this far." The sound of voices and footsteps echoed from the cave entrance. Klein's men were being thorough in their search. Marcus shifted closer to Emma, ready to move deeper into the cave system if necessary. They'd need to wait until the initial search moved on before attempting to reach the marina. "My father," Emma continued, her voice barely audible, "he built the Hamilton Group from nothing. Everything he did was to create something meaningful, something that could make real change in the world. That's why he chose me to take over, because I shared his vision. But the board, they just see profits and power." Marcus listened to the search patterns above them, years of combat experience helping him track the team's movements. "Sometimes the biggest threats come from inside," he said quietly. "People who think they deserve what someone else built. But right now, we need to focus on getting you to safety, then we can deal with Klein and his employers." Halfway to the marina, the storm hit in full force. Rain lashed against them as lightning split the sky, followed by booming thunder that seemed to shake the very cliffs. The weather created a natural smokescreen, but it also made their progress treacherous. The narrow trail had become slick with rain, forcing them to move with agonizing slowness. Through the curtain of rain, Marcus caught glimpses of Klein's teams. They had positioned themselves at strategic points along the coast, but the storm was disrupting their coordination. Radio communications would be spotty, and their expensive suits offered little protection against the elements. As they approached the marina, Emma pointed to a sleek vessel moored at the end of a distant pier. "That's our boat, the Second Wind. If we can reach it—" A massive thunderclap drowned out her words, but Marcus understood. The challenge would be crossing the exposed marina without being spotted. The storm had driven most people from the docks, but Marcus could make out at least 3 of Klein's men watching the boats. They were trying to look casual, probably posing as marina staff or boat owners waiting out the weather, but their stiff postures and constant scanning of the area gave them away. "We need a diversion," Marcus muttered, studying the layout of the marina. His eyes fell on a row of smaller fishing boats, their covers straining against the wind. Those canvas covers, in this wind, if they came loose. Emma caught his meaning immediately. The noise and movement would draw their attention, and in this weather it would look completely natural. She was already moving toward the nearest boat, her fingers working at the cover's fastenings. Marcus positioned himself where he could watch Klein's men while still appearing to be simply seeking shelter from the rain. Emma worked quickly, loosening just enough straps to ensure the wind would do the rest. Within minutes, the covers began to tear free, creating a cascade of flapping canvas and clattering equipment. The diversion worked perfectly. Klein's men moved to investigate the commotion, their ingrained professionalism compelling them to respond to potential property damage. Marcus and Emma used the moment to slip between the boats, staying low and using the storm's fury to mask their movement toward the second wind. As they neared the vessel, a figure emerged from the cabin, tall, weathered, with the unmistakable bearing of a career mariner. Captain Sullivan took in the situation with a single glance, quickly ushering them aboard. No words were needed. The look that passed between him and Emma spoke volumes about years of trust and loyalty. The sound of shouting carried through the storm. Klein's men had realized their mistake, but it was too late. The second wind's engines were already rumbling to life, and Captain Sullivan was maneuvering them away from the pier with the skill of decades at sea. The second wind cut through the churning waves, its powerful engines, driving them steadily away from the marina. Captain Sullivan handled the vessel with practiced ease, despite the storm's best efforts to knock them off course. Inside the main cabin, Emma immediately went to the ship's radio, while Marcus watched. Klein's diminishing figures on the dock through rain-streaked windows. "They'll have boats coming after us," Marcus said, his tactical mind already plotting potential scenarios. Probably already called in some high-speed rentals from nearby marinas. He turned to Captain Sullivan. "How fast can we go in these conditions?" The yacht. Captain's weathered face broke into a knowing smile. "Fast enough. This girl's got a few surprises. Mr. Hamilton made sure of that. But we've got a bigger advantage. I know these waters better than any rental captain they could hire, especially in weather like this." Emma's voice cut through their conversation, sharp with urgency. "Come in, Lighthouse Point. This is second wind. Father, are you there?" Static crackled through the radio speaker, broken by fragments of voices made unintelligible by the storm. After several tense minutes, a familiar voice broke through. "Emma, thank God." Robert Hamilton's relief was palpable, even through the distorted connection. "Are you safe?" "I'm with Captain Sullivan and Marcus Chen, the resort's security chief. He helped me escape." Emma's composure cracked slightly. "Dad, Klein's team, they were going to—" "I know, sweetheart. Dr. Foster told me everything." Hamilton's voice hardened. "Klein's entire operation is falling apart. When you disappeared, he lost control of the situation. The board members are asking questions he can't answer." Marcus moved closer to the radio. "Sir, they'll try to spin this, make it look like Ms. Hamilton fled because she was hiding something. We need to act fast to get ahead of their narrative." "Already on it," Hamilton replied. "I've activated our contingency protocols. Our legal team is moving in. And I've contacted federal authorities about Klein's methods, but right now I need you to get Emma to safety." Captain Sullivan joined the conversation. "I know a place, sir, the old fishing station on Widow's Point. Remote, defensible, and not on any recent maritime charts. Klein's people won't think to look there." "Good choice, Mike. I'll have our people meet you there." Static threatened to overwhelm Hamilton's voice. "Emma, whatever documents they showed you about me, they're forgeries. Klein's team manufactured everything. I know, Dad. I never believed them. That's why they were getting desperate. Emma's knuckles were white where she gripped the radio. But why didn't you tell me you suspected something like this might happen? The radio crackled with Hamilton's sigh, because I hoped I was wrong. When I realized certain board members were aligning against us, I started putting safeguards in place. That's why I brought Dr. Foster in, to help create a secure channel of communication, but I underestimated how far they'd go. A loud bang interrupted their conversation. The first of Klein's pursuit boats had reached them. Through the storm-swept windows, Marcus could see two high-powered vessels charging through the waves, their pilots pushing the engines dangerously. Hard for the conditions, Captain Sullivan calmly adjusted their course, using his intimate knowledge of the coastline to their advantage. "Hang on," he warned, steering them toward a series of partially submerged rocks that local fishermen called the Devil's Teeth. "This is going to get interesting." The second wind threaded through the hazardous passage with surgical precision, while their pursuers were forced to take wider, slower routes around the obstacle. The storm worked in their favor, its massive waves and driving rain making it nearly impossible for the pursuit boats to maintain visual contact. "They're falling behind," Marcus observed, "but they'll have called ahead to other marinas. They'll try to box us in along the coast." His military training kicked in, analyzing patrol patterns and response times. "How far to Widow's Point?" 20 minutes in good weather," Sullivan replied, his eyes never leaving the treacherous waters ahead. "In this storm, maybe 40. But those rental boats won't be able to maintain this speed much longer in these conditions. Their pilots aren't used to weather like this." Emma had moved to the navigation station, studying charts of the coastline. "There's something else," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Klein's team is operating without official authority. They can't risk calling in actual Coast Guard support. It would raise too many questions." Marcus nodded, understanding the implications. "They're limited to private resources, which means they can't set up a proper dragnet. Captain, if we can break their line of sight long enough to change course..." Sullivan was already adjusting. "They're heading, using the storm's intensity to mask their movements. There's a series of sea caves and hidden coves along this stretch. Local smugglers used them during Prohibition. Most modern boats don't even know they exist." The next 15 minutes were a masterclass in seamanship as Sullivan guided them through a maze of coastal features, using the storm's fury to their advantage. The pursuit boats fell further behind, their pilots increasingly hesitant to follow them into the more dangerous waters. Finally, they rounded a sharp bend in the coastline, and Widow's Point came into view, a stark, rocky promontory jutting into the Pacific like a defiant fist. The old fishing station was barely visible, its weathered buildings clinging to the rocks like barnacles. "We're not done yet," Marcus cautioned, watching their radar for signs of pursuit. "Klein's type doesn't give up easily. They'll regroup, try something else." He turned to Emma, seeing the same determination in her eyes that had gotten them this far. "But now we have time to prepare, and that's all we need." The old fishing station at Widow's Point emerged from the storm like a ghost from another era. Captain Sullivan guided the second wind into a hidden cove, its entrance nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The natural harbor was sheltered from the worst of the storm, its waters relatively calm compared to the chaos outside. The station itself was a collection of sturdy buildings constructed decades ago when the fishing industry still dominated the coast. Its main structure, built from local stone and weather-treated timber, had been maintained just enough to remain serviceable without drawing attention. Solar panels and satellite equipment were carefully concealed beneath weathered exteriors, into modern capabilities disguised as coastal decay. "My father bought this place years ago," Emma explained as they secured the boat. "He saw the potential for a private facility away from prying eyes. We've used it for corporate retreats, but It's also our emergency fallback position. She led them toward the main building, punching a code into a keypad hidden behind a rusted metal panel. Inside, the station's true nature revealed itself. Beyond the weathered exterior lay a fully equipped operations center, its technology masked from outside observation by careful architectural design. Multiple screens displayed weather patterns, coastal radar, and security feeds from concealed cameras covering all approaches to the point. "Klein's people won't know about this place," Captain Sullivan said, moving to the communications console. "It's owned through a series of shell companies, all registered to defunct fishing operations. Even most of the Hamilton Group's executives don't know it exists." Marcus did a quick security sweep, his military training automatically assessing defensive positions and potential vulnerabilities. "Good sight lines, multiple escape routes, reinforced walls," he noted approvingly. "But we need to plan for the worst. Klein's team will be systematic. They'll start checking every cove and..." Emma was already at one of the computer terminals, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'm accessing our secure servers, downloading everything we have on Klein and the board members who hired him. Dad's been gathering evidence for months, financial records, email trails, meeting minutes that were never officially recorded." A sudden burst of static from the communication system resolved into Robert Hamilton's voice. "Emma, Mike, are you secure?" "We're at the station," Sullivan confirmed. "No signs of pursuit. The storm gave us the cover we needed." "Good. Listen carefully. Things are moving fast." Klein's people are spinning a story about Emma having a mental breakdown, claiming she's trying to sabotage the company. They're painting me as a senile old man being manipulated by his daughter. Hamilton's voice was tight with controlled anger. "But they made mistakes, big ones." Emma looked up from her computer. "The falsified documents? The ones they tried to use against you?" "Exactly. They got sloppy in their rush to force your signature. Our forensics team found irregularities in the forgeries. More importantly, we've uncovered their real plan. This wasn't just about your inheritance. They were planning to strip the company's environmental division, sell off the sustainable energy patents to their own shell companies." Marcus watched the security feeds while listening. "They needed both of you out of the way, Ms. Hamilton's signatures on the documents and your supposed corruption as justification for the board to seize emergency control." "Precisely," Hamilton confirmed. "But now they're exposed. Federal investigators are already examining their financial records. Klein's team will be desperate. They know their window of opportunity is closing." As if on cue, one of the perimeter sensors flashed a warning. Marcus moved quickly to the security station, studying the feeds. "Multiple boats approaching from the south," he reported. "Too methodical to be fishing vessels. They're sweeping the coastline systematically." Captain Sullivan joined him at the monitors. "They're being careful about it, staying just far enough out to claim they're legitimate. Marine traffic. But that search pattern. They're looking for something specific." Emma's expression hardened as she watched the approaching vessels. "They won't stop, will they? Even with the federal investigation, they'll try to reach me before everything becomes public." "No, they won't stop," Marcus confirmed. "People like Klein don't know how to back down. Right now, silencing you is their only play." He turned to Sullivan. "Captain, what kind of resources do we have here?" Sullivan moved to a concealed panel in the wall, revealing an impressive array of emergency equipment. Communications jammers, thermal cameras, enough supplies for a month if needed. We've even got a high-speed Zodiac hidden in an underwater pen for worst-case scenarios. "And we have something else," Emma added, her voice carrying a new edge of confidence. "We have the truth." She gestured to her computer screen. "I've accessed everything. All the evidence of their planned corporate raid, the secret meetings, the offshore accounts they set up to handle the stolen patents. If this gets out, they don't just lose control of the company, they face serious federal charges." Marcus studied the approaching search pattern on the monitors. They'll have figured that out too. That's why they're pushing so hard to find you. He turned to Emma. You're not just a witness anymore. You're holding the evidence that could destroy them. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the station's secure walls, a different kind of storm was brewing. They had the high ground, the evidence, and the element of surprise. But Klein's team was closing in, and they would be fighting for their very survival. We need to get this information out, Emma said firmly. Multiple secure channels, distributed so widely they can't possibly contain it. But we have to buy enough time to make it happen. Marcus nodded grimly. Then we'll buy you that time, whatever it takes. Thunder cracked overhead as Marcus studied the monitors, watching Klein's search boats tighten their grid pattern along the coast. The high-tech equipment inside the fishing station painted a clear picture of their methodical approach, professional, patient, and inevitably drawing closer to Widow's Point. Emma worked furiously at her terminal, encrypting and distributing the evidence through multiple secure channels. I'm sending everything to our lawyers, federal authorities, and trusted journalists, she explained, her fingers never stopping their rapid movement across the keyboard. Once it's out there, Klein can't contain it. But the uploads are taking longer than expected. The storm's interfering with our satellite connection. Captain Sullivan monitored the weather radar, his expression grim. Storm's actually intensifying. Visibility's down to almost nothing out there. That works in our favor for now, but... He gestured to a particular pattern on the screen. They're adapting their search pattern, focusing on places where a boat might seek shelter from weather like this. Smart. A sharp beep from one of the security sensors drew their attention. Marcus moved quickly to investigate, his combat-trained eyes analyzing the new threat. Thermal imaging's picking up 3 boats, holding position just outside the southern cove. They're staying in deeper water, probably using sonar to map the coastline. Looking for hidden entrances, Sullivan confirmed. That cove we used, it'll show up on detailed sonar. We've got maybe 20 minutes before they find it, storm or no storm. Emma looked up from her computer, tension evident in her voice. The uploads are only at 60%. We need more time. Marcus's mind raced through tactical options. Years of combat experience had taught him that sometimes the best defense was a calculated offense. Captain, you mentioned a hidden zodiac. Fast, maneuverable. In weather like this, we could use it to draw them away from the point. Sullivan nodded slowly, understanding the strategy. Create a target. Make them think we're trying to slip past them while they're focused on the coast. It could work, but it's risky as hell in these conditions. I'll go, Marcus said firmly. I've handled boats in combat conditions. If I can pull even 2 of their vessels away from here, it gives us better odds. He turned to Emma. How much longer do you need? 25 minutes for the full upload. Maybe faster if we can boost the signal strength somehow. She studied the satellite connectivity readings. The storm's the main problem. It's playing havoc with our transmission rates. Sullivan moved to a storage locker, pulling out maritime. Survival gear. Take this, full weather gear, emergency beacon flares. That Zodiac's got enough fuel to reach the next 3 ports if you have to. He paused, then added, but getting back here in these conditions might not be an option, Marcus finished. I know, but keeping them away from this station is what matters right now. He started gearing up, checking the waterproof radio Sullivan handed him. Once that evidence goes public, Klein's whole operation collapses. We just need to buy that time. Emma stood suddenly, her face set with determination. There's another option, the station's backup power system. If we reroute all of it to the satellite uplink, we could boost the signal strength significantly. Might cut the upload time in half. But we'd lose most of our security systems, Sullivan warned. Thermal imaging, perimeter sensors, everything would go dark. We're about to lose those anyway once they find us, Marcus pointed out. Better to get the evidence out first. How long would the transfer take with full power? Emma calculated quickly. Maybe 12 minutes for a complete upload, but we'd be running blind during that time. A massive wave crashed against the point, the sound reverberating through the station's walls. On the monitors, Klein's boats were moving again, their search pattern tightening further. They were almost certainly using the storm as cover to bring in more vessels without attracting official attention. Marcus made his decision. Do it! Reroute the power. Captain, help me prep the Zodiac. When their boats get close enough to detect the cove, I'll launch. That should pull their attention away from the point just as we go dark in here. He turned to Emma. The moment those files finish uploading, get word to your father. He'll need to move fast to protect the distribution channels before Klein's. People can interfere. Sullivan was already moving toward the underwater pen where the Zodiac was hidden. I'll set up emergency lights on backup batteries. Not much, but enough to avoid stumbling around in the dark. And I've got something else that might help. He pulled a small case from beneath a workbench. Military-grade smoke markers. Drop these in the water, and even in this storm, they'll create enough visual noise to make tracking difficult. As they prepared for their respective roles, Emma caught Marcus's arm. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything. This isn't your fight." Marcus paused in his preparations, considering her question. "In the military, I learned that the hardest battles aren't always about territory or resources. Sometimes they're about protecting the right people, the ones trying to do good in the world." He checked the waterproof seals on his gear. "Your father built something meaningful. Klein and his employers want to tear it down for profit. Sometimes the right thing to do is just that simple." The station's lights flickered as Emma began the power transfer process. Outside, the storm continued its assault on Widow's Point, while somewhere in the darkness, Klein's boats drew ever closer to their hidden sanctuary. The next few minutes would determine not just their survival, but the future of everything Robert Hamilton had spent his life building. The backup lights cast eerie shadows through the station as Emma initiated the power transfer. Critical systems shut down one by one, their screens going dark as energy was diverted to the satellite uplink. Outside, the storm's intensity matched the growing tension within the station's walls. Marcus descended to the underwater pen with Captain Sullivan, the hidden chamber accessible only through a narrow stairwell. The Zodiac waited in the darkness, a sleek vessel designed for speed and maneuverability. As they performed final checks, Sullivan's radio crackled with Emma's voice. "First boat just picked up the cove entrance on sonar. They're moving to investigate." "Time to move," Marcus said, pulling on his waterproof gear. The captain helped him through the final preparations, both men working with practiced efficiency. Through the pen's underwater sensors, they could hear the approaching boat's engines, growing louder despite the storm's fury. "Once you draw them off," Sullivan explained, "I'll seal the pen. They might find the cove, but the pen's entrance will look like part of the natural rock formation." He gripped Marcus's shoulder firmly. "Good luck, son. That Zodiac's got enough power to outrun anything they've brought, but in this weather—" Marcus nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. "Just keep them safe until those files go through. Everything else is secondary." He mounted the Zodiac, checking his radio one last time. "Emma, what's your status?" "Upload at 40%. Signal strength holding steady with the power boost. 10 minutes, maybe less." Her voice carried both tension and determination. "Marcus, be careful." The Zodiac's powerful engine hummed to life as Sullivan opened the underwater pen's outer door. The storm's full force hit Marcus immediately, rain and sea spray mixing into a stinging assault. He guided the vessel out slowly, using the rocky coastline for cover until the last possible moment. Through his radio, he heard Emma updating him on the search boat's positions. 3 vessels were now converging on the cove's entrance, while 2 more maintained their outer patrol pattern. Marcus waited until the closest boat was nearly over the submerged pen's position, then gunned the Zodiac's engine. The small boat shot out from behind the rocks like a bullet, its powerful engine throwing a rooster tail of spray. Marcus heard Shouts of surprise from Klein's nearest vessel, followed by the immediate rev of their engines. The chase was on. He pushed the Zodiac hard, using his military training and the vessel's superior maneuverability to navigate through the storm-tossed waves. Behind him, two of Klein's boats gave chase immediately, while the third held position near the cove. Exactly as he'd hoped, they couldn't risk leaving the area completely uncovered. Two boats in pursuit, he reported through the radio. Heading south along the coast, third vessel still watching the cove. The Zodiac crested a massive wave, becoming airborne for a heart-stopping moment, before crashing back into the churning sea. Emma's voice came through between bursts of static. Upload at 65%. Signal holding. They haven't found the station yet. A pause, then. Marcus, more boats approaching from the north. They're trying to box you in. Marcus had anticipated this. He dropped one of Sullivan's smoke markers, the military-grade device immediately creating a wide swath of visual cover. Using the smoke and storm as concealment, he executed a sharp turn, cutting between his pursuers and forcing them to adjust their course awkwardly. Inside the station, Emma and Sullivan watched the drama unfold through their remaining functional sensors. The upload continued steadily, 70% then 75%, the satellite connection holding despite the storm's best efforts to disrupt it. Suddenly, alarms blared from the station's emergency systems. "They're here," Sullivan announced grimly. 3 teams approaching the station by foot must have landed north of the point while we were focused on the boats. He moved quickly to secure their position, but with most systems running on minimal power, their options were limited. Emma's fingers flew across her keyboard. 85%, almost there. Just need a few more minutes. The sound of boots on the station's outer deck became audible even over the storm. Dad standing by, with the legal team. The moment this upload completes, everything goes public. Sullivan positioned himself near the main entrance, armed with one of the station's emergency weapons. They'll try to breach from multiple points. Standard tactical approach. His years of Coast Guard experience evident in his calm assessment. "Keep working, Emma. We'll handle this." Outside, Marcus continued his deadly dance with Klein's pursuit boats. The Zodiac's superior handling allowed him to maintain his lead, but the storm was intensifying further, each wave now a potential catastrophe. He'd drawn them nearly 2 miles from Widow's Point, but his fuel gauge was dropping steadily. Emma's voice cut through the storm static. "Upload complete. Files are out. All channels." The relief in her voice was palpable. "Marcus, get out of there. Head for safe harbor. Her transmission cut off abruptly. Klein's team had breached the station. The sounds of confrontation carried clearly through Marcus's radio before the signal died completely. He swung the Zodiac around, fighting both the storm and his instinct to return immediately to Widow's Point. But he knew his role now was to maintain the deception, to keep the pursuit boats away as long as possible, while the evidence did its work. Hours later, as dawn broke over a coast still battered by storm remnants, the full scope of their victory became clear. Federal agents had moved swiftly once the evidence went public, arresting Klein and several board members. Robert Hamilton had leveraged the revelations perfectly, his legal team working through the night to secure both the company's future and his daughter's safety. The station at Widow's Point had been secured with no serious injuries. Sullivan's preparation and Emma's quick thinking had kept Klein's team at bay until help arrived. Marcus, after successfully evading his pursuers, had been picked up by a Coast Guard cutter, his Zodiac finally running out of fuel some 20 miles down the coast. 1 week later, Marcus stood in Robert Hamilton's office, still bearing some bruises from his encounter with the storm. Emma was there, along with Sullivan and Dr. Foster, as Hamilton outlined the changes coming to his company. The environmental division would be expanded, not sold off, and new safeguards were being put in place to prevent any future attempts at corporate theft. None of this would have been possible without you, Hamilton said to Marcus, his gratitude evident. Your courage and skill saved not just my daughter's life, but everything we've worked to build. He slid a folder across his desk. I'd like you to consider a new position, head of global security for the Hamilton Group. We need someone with your integrity and judgment to protect what matters most. Marcus looked at the people around him. Emma's encouraging smile, Sullivan's approving nod, Dr. Foster's quiet pride, and realized he'd found something he thought he'd lost after leaving the military, a mission worth fighting for and people worth protecting. When do I start? He asked, accepting both the folder and the new chapter it represented. Emma's smile widened. Just in time for our expansion into sustainable energy projects in Asia. Hope you're ready for more adventures. Marcus returned her smile, feeling for the first time in years that he was exactly where he needed to be. Always ready. That's what training is for.